Hi, I'm Colleen Van Lent, and I'm happy to welcome you to Introduction to HTML5. I'm very excited to teach this course because I love the idea that we finally will have some course that will really explain the basics to as many people as possible. I love working with people and I love working with technology, and I think the best thing we can do is have as many people involved as possible to really make sure that we're building things that everyone can use. So in this course, we will be covering the basics. I really can't emphasize enough that we will be starting at the very basic building blocks. So we'll start off talking about what's called syntax and semantics. What are the actual code that people write in order to make a web page a web page? And are there any special meanings behind any of these words that can convey special information to those who may not be able to access the web the same way I do? So perhaps someone who uses special accessibility tools. After we cover the syntax and semantics, we're going to talk more about this accessibility idea that I just alluded to. This idea that if we're going to build a web page, what do we need to do to make sure the most people as possible can access the information? We're also going to be talking about getting started in technology and writing code. And when I mean talking about getting started, I mean really talking about getting started. Right down to you and I are going to walk through together on how we're going to create a file. One of the things I think that really trips people up when they're starting to learn computer science or any type of technology-based criteria or curriculum is that professors or instructors say, let's get started, here's your homework, go ahead and do it, and everyone just kind of stops because they're not sure where to get started. I really want to be there for you to show you how to get started and get off on the right foot. So let's talk about what we'll cover in this course. In week 1, the focus is on questions. It's not on coding, it's on questions. So I want you to understand what happens when you type something into the URL. If you type in www.introwebdesign.com, how is this page magically appearing in front of your browser? I also want to talk to you about what types of tools you are going to need in order to code. So we're going to talk about editors and browsers and other different software tools, because I want you to know right from the start what you're going to need in order to succeed in this class. Finally, we're really going to talk about HTML5. What happened to HTML1? What happened to HTML2? What is this evolution of what's going on with web design and the languages we used? So in week 1, again, almost no coding, really just giving you an idea of how the web works and why it's important for you to be able to interact with people and with code that's being used to create your sites. Week 2, we're going to talk a little bit of theory and then, unfortunately for some people, a lot of code. So there's this idea of something called the document object model upon which all web pages are built. If I can get you to understand just a little bit about that, then later on, if you decide to go off and use WordPress or some other software to make your own website, you're going to be able to really understand what's going on so much better. We're going to talk about things called contextual tags and headings and different things we can use to make our site have different meanings and different appearances. We're going to talk about links, images, lists, tables, and also multimedia in case you would like to add any video or audio to your site. Week 3, we're really going to put it all together. At this point, you should know just enough about HTML5 where you'll be dangerous, where you can create something that works but doesn't work all the time. So in week 3, we're going to put it together, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that are often overlooked, such as validating your code. How can we make sure that the code that you wrote doesn't just look good, it's syntactically correct, it's going to work everywhere? So again, when we validate your code, we'll talk about the syntax, but we'll also talk about accessibility, which is, hey, we validated your code to make sure the rules are there, but let's also validate and make sure that the meaning is there as well. Finally, we'll talk about what's called domain name registration and web hosting, because it's a lot more fun to make websites if you can actually put it out there on the internet and let your friends and family see it as well. Finally, we'll work on a final project where you will put together a lot of the different things that you've been learning. You are going to create what we call a syntactically valid multi-page website. So your site will have at least 2 to 3 pages. After you've done your coding, you'll run it through to make sure it validates and it's very accessible. So your final project is actually going to be something that's a little bit ugly, I'm going to admit to right now, because we're not going to be talking about styling, we're not talking about different things. I really just want you to understand the HTML5 language, and that's all about content. So let's talk logistics. Let's talk about who this class is for. Who am I aiming for my kind of star student? I'm really looking forward to teaching the complete beginner, all right? This class is not for those people who were building a computer down in their basement when they were 12 years old. I mean, you're very welcome to hang out with us, but we are really here to talk about how we, through persistence, can create a website. One of the things that I'm kind of anti about is the word passion. Now, I'm passionate about teaching you this material, but I don't really feel like you need to be passionate about technology or passionate about computing to really get a lot out of this class. Instead, it's about persistence. I'd like you to just hang in there and learn enough that you can go off and really help people build better technology. So a little bit about who I am. I have a PhD in computer science, which is really the least important part of my qualifications to teach this class. Instead, I have 2 decades of teaching experience, and I have taught a wide range of different students. My emphasis has always been on education. And I'm somewhat famous for running around the classroom, helping people debug their code, finding out what's going on here, finding out what's going on there. So this whole idea of teaching this class is kind of novel to me because I'm sitting here, not moving. So the important part is that I really do care about people succeeding, and so I'm hoping that I can help you take your skills to the next level. Here's what everyone wants to know. In this class, what kind of workload will there be and how will you be evaluated? There are going to be weekly videos. Some of them are like this, a lecture format. You should really feel free to watch them anywhere. But I'd also like to include some videos that are going to be much more demo format. And by that, I mean you really want to watch the video with the computer next to you so you can type along and test it out and try it. There will be weekly readings. Most of them will be from a free online textbook, but there may be some other online articles I include as well if I happen to come across something that's very timely for what we've been learning. There will be weekly assessments, typically in the form of quizzes, and there will be that final project. And I put in here warning it will be ugly. I don't mean that the process will be ugly. I think you'll find it very straightforward. It's just, again, I can't emphasize enough that this class is about the language HTML5. It's not about creating beautiful sites. It's about you really learning just the building blocks. And it's always so much easier to build something ugly the first time than build something beautiful. So how will you succeed in this class? In a perfect world, you would be coding with 2 or 3 other people and you'd be talking and you'd never be coding alone. So I'm hoping that you'll create a community, probably through the message boards. I need you to work smart. One of the things that kills me is when people say, oh, I spent 3 or 4 hours working on this. I never want to hear that from a student. Instead, I feel that if you've ever run into a problem when you're coding, you should stop after 10, 15, 20 minutes max and go walk away. Go get help from someone, take a break, think about something else. It's all about working smart, not necessarily hard. Next, you really need to learn how to look things up on your own. There is no way I can teach you everything you need to know about HTML5, and you wouldn't want me to. It'd be very boring. Instead, you need to feel the confidence to go out and use search engines to look up the topics that you're interested in. My job is to give you those keywords and key ideas so you know what it is you want to search for. Finally, you really need to practice, practice, practice. You will not succeed in this course unless you've written the code yourself and really tried to muster your way through some of the mistakes and typos that you're going to have. So let's just review. Once again, this class is for beginners, and I'm excited to have you join us. When you're done with this class, you will have the ability to write and understand HTML5 code. So you're not leaving as a developer, but you are going to leave as someone who understands code. And finally, one of the key things that I'm going to stress throughout this whole course is that you will understand the importance of accessibility in technology. If when this course was done, I had even one student who said, hey, you know what? I'm going to go on and I might not be a coder, but I am going to go work with somebody else to help make their code more accessible, I would be thrilled with that. So welcome to the course, and I hope you have a lot of fun as you learn more about HTML5. Hi, today we're going to be talking about HTML5, specifically what it is and why we aren't learning HTML1 instead. So what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Markup languages are actually very common. They're not the same as programming languages. Instead, they're special languages that use tags to annotate or mark up documents. In HTML, the tags tell the browsers where you want to put headings, images, lists, links, etc. A .html file is a special kind of file. You've already seen special file extensions before. Whenever you open a file that has .doc, your computer knows to open it in Microsoft Word. If you see a file with .ppt, your computer knows, oh, that's a PowerPoint file. I should open it in PowerPoint. In the same way, when your computer sees a .html file, it knows that it should open it in an internet browser such as Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. Your browser can read this file and it knows how to display it on the screen. It's more than that. HTML file tags also allow screen readers and other assistive devices to utilize the tags to present the information in new and special ways. So HTML is very similar to English. You can understand it even if you don't know much about it. Let's look at this example HTML file over here. Most of it is just typical English language. This is an important heading, or hi there, I'm going to include a link to the course page. But if you look closely, you can see we've added these little tiny tags that the browser uses to know how to represent the material. So H1 is just a heading tag. It says to the browser, hey, this is something really important. I want you to put it in bigger font, and also if someone's using an assistive device, I want them to know this is something important. H2 is also displays some sort of importance, but not as much. I have a P tag for paragraph, and I have another tag down here called an anchor tag to let the browser know I don't want you to just show this material, I want you to actually link it to a different web page. So here's the output when any browser would look at our code. In the beginning, learning HTML is mostly about learning all those different tags that I showed you in that file. This is called learning the syntax. It's how you learn which brackets to use, backslashes, and different things like that. You spend most of your time going, oh, did I remember that tag and did I write it the right way? That's very short-lived. In just a little amount of time, you're going to gain the confidence to not worry about your syntax and instead to be thinking about the semantics or the meaning behind the tags. How important is this information that I'm trying to get across, and is this the right tag to be using? If someone's searching my page, can they find what they're looking for even if they can't see the text? Can they use the tags to navigate through it? So what happened to HTML1? Why are we using something called HTML5? Well, let's talk about the early years. HTML was created in 1990 as a way to electronically connect different documents via hyperlinks, hence this idea of a web of connections. What was happening is that scientists were using the internet to list their different research papers, and you would have a long list, each paper independent of the other. But HTML gave you ways that you could read a paper and right within the text link to another exciting physics paper. Because the audience for HTML tended to be people like my dad up there in the corner, they were nuclear physicists. They didn't care about things such as color, images, or anything that wasn't science related. And that was the key. HTML was intended to work across any platform. And in order to do this, you really had to avoid things such as special fonts or different colors, or anything that really was more about layout than content. However, in 1993, Mosaic emerged as the first graphical browser. And what that means is that it was the first browser to actually introduce the idea of images. And when that happened, there was a lot of debate among the research community as to whether or not this was a good thing. The pioneers really wanted to keep it simple, content-based, let everyone access it. But the innovators were saying no. People like pictures, they like layout, they like that even as much as they like the content. So there was a big battle between how the internet should evolve from that point. So after Mosaic emerged, the use of the internet just absolutely exploded, and more people were using it for commercial means instead of just for doing research. Mosaic had challengers though, in the form of Netscape, Internet Explorer, and other browsers. This was the start of what we call the browser wars. Each of these browsers decided that they wanted to create these proprietary tags that would only work on their browser. Some of the examples were Marquee, where you could have scrolling text, or Blink, which would only work on some of the browsers and not others. Other tags weren't proprietary, they actually worked on any browser, but they went against the original spirit of HTML. They were tags such as font, or center for centering your text, or background color. This may not sound like a bad thing, but some computers didn't have the access, didn't have the ability to have all the different colors that other computers might have. And this led to some really ugly looking pages. It also led to the origination of what we call the best viewed on messages. When you went to a site, you were almost immediately told which browser you should really view the site on, otherwise you weren't going to get the optimal experience. We, in a way, suffer from browser wars or best viewed on images today. Many times when you go to a page, you'll see that you can't actually access the full content if you're on your phone unless you click on a link to the full website. So how did this happen? How did we get to the point where different browsers weren't agreeing on the different roles that HTML should play? This comes back to the idea that no one runs the internet or the web. However, some groups have taken a more proactive role to try to help standardize what's going on out there. The first is the Internet Engineering Task Force. They really focus on the idea of how the different networks should collaborate and how they should work together. The World Wide Web Consortium instead deals with HTML and the evolution of HTML. They want to know what kind of tags the browsers should and should not support. Finally, one of the newest groups is the Web Accessibility Initiative. They want to make sure that no matter how people are accessing the web, they have the same ability to view the content. We had this evolution of browsers that we've been talking about. In 1990 to 94, it was all very simple, text-based. In 93, we talked about how the images entered the scene and pretty much exploded the internet. Cross-browser compatibility made many of the web pages just fall apart and led to incredibly ugly code. In the beginning of 2000, browsers went back to this idea of separating content from style. And in 2005, it became standard practice to use HTML files, which we'll be learning about in this course, to create the content, and CSS files to style it. So as the browsers evolved, so too did HTML. The way it tends to work in most computer science and technology fields is that it's the coders and the developers who push the standards. So as coders learned that there were more and more things they wanted the ability to do, it's the browser's job to keep up. So where are we now? HTML5 is a cooperation between the W3C and the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group. And what they've done is they've established these 4 guidelines for how HTML5 should be approached as browsers go to support it. The first idea is that new features should be based on HTML, CSS, which is the styling language, the DOM, and JavaScript, nothing more. They want to reduce the need for external plugins. It's very frustrating when you're on a browser and you find that you can't watch the video that somebody posted. They also want to move so that markup, or the markup language, can replace scripting. If you find that more and more developers are writing code to make something happen, get rid of the code and just make a simple tag that can do it instead. And finally, HTML5 should be device independent. It shouldn't matter whether you're on your phone, your laptop, a PC, or even on a screen reader. You want everyone to have the same access to the information. So when you think back over this video, there are certain lessons I really hope stick with you. The first is the idea that HTML is not a programming language, but rather a way that browsers can translate documents into viewable web pages. HTML was intended to facilitate many different content types: images, pictures, links, lists, everything along that line. What we've found throughout the history of the internet is that when designers want to do something, they tend to write non-standard code to force browsers to do it. So this is why we're developing new standards in HTML5 to handle these new requirements that people desire and push browsers to adopt the new standards. Today, let's talk about the request-response cycle, or basically what happens when you type something into the address bar of your browser. One of the things I think is really funny, and I'm guilty of it as well, is that we all do things and we have no idea how they work. So if I were to ask you, when you type in an address, what happens? So this lecture is actually one of the most technical of this entire class. I don't want you to feel like you need to memorize this or write it down, but I do think it'll help you understand a little bit more what's going on as you learn HTML5. So one of the things you might want to understand is the client-server relationship. Servers are basically machines that hold all the resources, and our hope is that they're always connected to the network. Clients are what we're using. We're the machines that you use for personal use, like laptops, phones, etc. Let me show you in this picture. It's really common to use networks such as something called a LAN or a WAN. A LAN is a local area network. And so what I have right here is this idea that we can have 3 different computers and they're all sharing one server. Why would we want to do that? Well, a lot of times you only have one printer or one of the different resources. This way, all 3 machines can work together and share that one resource. So the LAN is the local area network. Sometimes you want to have something larger or a wide area network. So in movies where the good guy is breaking into the building to steal the software, what's typically happened is they have this server that everyone who works in the building can access, but no one outside the building. Or you can even have it across different buildings, but you don't want anyone from the outside to really be able to get your information. So a local area network is kind of like your office building. A wide area network might be a university where you want to be able to share servers across multiple buildings. The largest wide area network is, of course, the internet. So now we get back to that question of what happens when you type something into the URL. What you're doing is that you, the client, are requesting a web page, and the server needs to respond with the appropriate files. So when you type something in, this is called the URL. And every URL has 3 parts. The protocol, how you want to connect, the domain, which is the server, and then optionally, you can include the document. So even though you're typing in one URL, one of the things to realize is that usually you're actually requesting lots and lots of files all at once. So the protocols that most people have seen, the first one is HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. The second one, HTTPS, is the same idea, only now we're having a more secure protocol. So if you're ever connecting to a bank or any place where you're putting in passwords, make sure that the first thing you see in that URL is HTTPS. If you don't connect. The third one is called the File Transfer Protocol, and it's a little bit different. When you see HTTP, it's kind of expecting that you're going to give back and forth HTML5 code. With FTP, it could be any type of file. So we have the protocol. Now let's talk about what the domain names represent. Usually the domain names are something recognizable, such as umich.edu would be for University of Michigan, google.com, wikipedia.org. So each of these sites has a different top-level domain. How did you get them? How do some people get to be .edu and some .com, some .biz, etc.? Well, they're actually determined by ICANN, and their job is to go in and decide which types of organizations qualify for different domains. I've included a link here if you want. You can go and see what the different types are. But the important thing to know is that your domain name is actually mapped to an address. And in the old days, like when my dad was on the internet, if he wanted to connect to someplace, he would actually type in numbers, 185.261, etc., etc. Well, there's been a new version of IP addresses because every single client needs their own address. And if you think of how many people have laptops and smartphones, we need a lot of different options. So with these IP addresses, you basically have sets of numbers, you have these different sets right here where each X can represent one of 16 different values. So you can see we have a lot of options, over 300 trillion, in fact. As I said, luckily for you, the domain name server lets you type in something really simple like umich or Google, and it's the one that turns it into that really long number. The last part of your URL is the document. So sometimes you want to specify a very specific document that you want to get. So for instance, the contact page, or in this case, another one, I have the file that's inside a folder. But sometimes you don't put a document at all. In fact, most of the time you don't. If you type in wikipedia.org or facebook.com, there's no file name, but that's okay. Every server has a default every server has a default document that it's going to return. Usually it's called index.html. All right, so we figured it out. We know what it means when we're typing something in. We understand the request. What happens though once we type that in is we are actually going to get back a lot of information. Headers, cookies, form data, all the stuff that you don't see. So the important thing to know is that the server returns files, not web pages. For a lot of us, we're very visual. So when we type in a URL, we're looking and we're like, oh, here's my page. But sometimes the browser might be returning something for different types of screen readers, assistive technology. So it's not returning a web page, it's returning lots and lots of files. Hopefully. I will admit that sometimes the server can't fulfill the request. And if it can't, it'll send back an error code. I think a lot of you are familiar with 404, where it says file not found. That usually means you typed something in wrong. If you get a 500 error, that actually means that the server's down. So you may as well go have a snack, do something fun, come back later and type it in again. So I want to kind of do a live demo with you of what happens when we type something in. So I've written it down for you. It looks up the domain, the DNS returns an IP address, and then a whole bunch of files start to be returned. Let's take a look. What I've done here is I've gone to the School of Information site at the University of Michigan. I simply typed in si.umich.edu. I didn't type in the protocol because it usually just defaults. So what you see here visually is a page, student looking out, looking very inspired, etc. But now I'm going to do a little trick here where I right-click on the screen and I'm going to choose the option that says Inspect. And a little button, a window is going to pop up to the side here. And I'm going to say, you know what? I would like to see all the information that's being returned when I actually request this page. I'm requesting one page. I'm going to hit refresh. And if you look off to the side, don't worry that you can't see the details. But you should see that this single page is actually made up of lots and lots of files. And each one of these files was a separate request. Okay, so let's review. This was a kind of long video where really all I want you to come away from it with is the knowledge that every URL has those three parts: the protocol, the domain, and the document. And realize that what you're creating is bigger than just one file at a time. Every request-response cycle is usually lots and lots of rounds of communication between the client and the server. So we're going to start off small. We're going to do one file at a time. But you can always look ahead to building bigger and bigger web applications. One of the things you might notice is that there are a lot of different options for how you can view web pages. And these different options are called your different browsers. So different browsers have their pros and cons. I am not one of those people who gets really passionate about using one over the other. But I will tell you, as you become a web developer, if you decide to, you're going to want to know some of these differences. It's perfectly natural to have a preferred browser. For most people, it's whichever one was installed on their computer. But when you want to create websites, you might have one browser you use to look at things, but you really want to test your site on multiple browsers. So let's talk about some of the differences. First, we have Internet Explorer. And for a long time, it was the most popular browser, and that was just because it was the one that came with Microsoft Windows. It was platform dependent, and what that means is that it doesn't automatically work if you have a Mac. In 2015, Windows 10 came out, and instead of including Internet Explorer as the default, it's using something called Microsoft Edge. Edge is meant to replace Internet Explorer, so people who buy new computers are going to be using Edge. But don't forget, people don't buy new computers all the time, or even if they do buy a new computer, they might decide they still like Internet Explorer better. So you basically want to make sure that you're considering both browsers. Another option is Google Chrome. Google Chrome was developed by, surprise, Google, and it was a freeware that they created to be used on Microsoft Windows. However, it's later been ported, or you can consider it changed, so that it works on Linux, your Apple machines, your Android, basically most machines that you're going to come across. The nice thing about Google Chrome is that they really focused on security. So if that's something that you're kind of concerned about, Chrome is a good way to go. The next option is Firefox. Once again, the theme seems to be I'm always recommending free and open source browsers. What open source means is that they've actually shared their code with everyone for how they created Firefox. And this is a really great way to let people make suggestions and improvements to it. It's also available for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and different BSD operating systems. So who's using the different browsers? Back in 2014, I can show you that Internet Explorer had a really big chunk of the market, right around there. You had Internet Explorer 11, Internet Explorer 10, Internet Explorer 9, etc. So they had the biggest chunk, and then Chrome was getting a lot bigger, as well as Firefox. Well, when we look over here at 2017, though, we can see that Chrome really made a big surge, and up to 64% of desktops and laptops were using Google Chrome, followed by Firefox, Internet Explorer, etc. This is always going to change. It's going to flux. You can't pick one browser and say, hey, this is the new one that everyone's going to be using. And the other interesting thing to kind of think about is, especially in this old map over here, people use really old browsers because people like to use what they're used to. One thing that I'm hoping all the students in my class take into consideration, though, is accessibility. Accessibility is basically the ability of a browser to support all these special functionalities and all these new HTML5 tags and all types of assistive technology. So one place you can go is this site, www.html5accessibility.com. And what you'll find at this site is how well the different browsers are supporting the tags. So you can see right now, Edge actually has 100% compliance, which isn't surprising because it's one of the newest browsers, so they had accessibility in mind right from the beginning. The other browsers were created before people were paying quite as much attention, so they're definitely making strides to get better and better. However, it is important to notice that Internet Explorer is at 56%, and since it's been basically relegated into the background, it's unlikely that it's going to get much better. So what I want you to take away from this is that browsers can really vary in how well they adhere to different standards. And different versions of browsers also need to be considered as well. Just because something didn't work in 2018 doesn't mean it won't work in 2019. So the best thing that you can do is write your code and then open it up in Safari and Firefox and Chrome, as many different browsers as you can. Not only will it make your site better, but it'll be a little bit interesting for you as you can look at the different ways that HTML5 is supported. Hi, today we're finally going to write some code, and I'm going to walk you through it by showing you how you can use an editor. One of the biggest pitfalls I've seen many of my students make is that they listen too carefully to what I'm saying rather than actually trying to dive in and start coding themselves. So while I encourage you to sit back and watch what I'm going to do right now, in a little bit I'm hoping you'll sit down and you'll code with me. The first step is that you need to create and edit your files. One of the biggest pitfalls you're going to encounter is that you'll be saving your files all over the place. You're not able to find them later on. So decide how you'll be organizing your files. What are you going to name your folder? Where are you going to put it? Second, you need to decide on a naming convention. This is just a fancy way of saying decide how you're going to name your files. So although many people use a Mac and you're allowed to use spaces in your file names, this is not something you want to do when you're writing code. So decide that if you have two words you want to put together, if you're going to use underscores to connect them, or something we call camel case, where you capitalize the first letter of each word. Just remember, never use spaces and be very consistent about your capitalization if you're going to use it. Finally, you need to decide on an editor. If using a Windows machine, Notepad is already built in. You can also consider using Notepad++ or Sublime. If you're using a Mac, TextEdit is the default editor, although many people also use TextWrangler. I'll be using Sublime throughout the rest of the course, but for today, I will be showing you examples of how to edit in Notepad and TextEdit as well. So in order to get started, let's quickly review the 5 steps that we're going to do, a few of them repeatedly. You're going to start by opening your editor, and then you're going to save your file, add some content, save the file again, and open it in your browser. I want to walk you through a quick example, and I'm going to use Sublime to do it. But don't worry, I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the other ways to do it as well. So I've brought up my Sublime editor here, a nice black file. I'm going to start off by going to File and Save. And I'm going to name it just firstpage.html. Now, one of the things you need to decide right away is where you're going to save this. Hopefully you've decided on this before you even started working. I'm going to keep mine in a folder called Web Pages that I've put on my desktop. But you can pick anything here, or even if you want to, if you click off to the side here, you can create a brand new folder. What you don't want to do is save all of your code on your desktop. Let's go save. And now, while there are many times when I'm going to force you to sit through and watch me type horribly on the screen, this one, just to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and cheat and paste in some code that I've already written. As you can see, I have my doc type, the head section, and the body. In the head, I've included my encoding in my title, and in the body, we're just going to say hello. I went in and I saved it using Control-S. You can always do File Save, but I find Control-S is much quicker. And for every editor you use, there's these little helpful keys to help you know whether or not you've changed anything. So if you look right now at firstpage.html, which might be hard for you to see, if I were to go in and change anything, you actually get a little circle to let you know that, oh, you haven't saved in a while. All right, so I've gone ahead, I've created content, and now it's time for me to open my page. One way to do it is to head over here to my folder, and oh, here's firstpage.html. For me, there's a little icon of Chrome off to the side. For you, it might be a different browser. I'm going to go ahead and click on it and bring up my first page, and I have success. I cannot stress enough that most of the time when you type something at first, it's actually not going to work for you. For me, luckily, I have the power of editing. You have no idea that it actually took me a few attempts to get that file to work because I was messing around with some things. Throughout the entire course, I'm going to try to show you areas where you might have a problem. Hopefully you won't, but if you do, they're all very simple to fix. One of the most common problems is that when you right-click on the file, instead of opening up nicely in the browser, it opens up your editor instead. If you'd like to fix that, all you need to do is right-click on the file and select Open With. Another issue that happens quite a bit is that when you open up your file, instead of seeing a nicely formatted web page, instead you actually see all of your tags. When that happens, you need to check your file extension and make sure that it says .html and not something like .text or .rtf. Another issue that happens quite a bit is that you change your code, but your page looks exactly the same. There are 2 reasons that this tends to happen. One is that you have to do something called refresh your browser. This just means you upload the contents. The second thing that happens quite often is that you forgot to verify your file name. Let me show you an example of this one. So let's go back to our original file. As you can see, I have Hello World written here. This is a very computer science-y type thing to say, and since I'm trying to seem more normal, I'm going to change this to Hello Everybody. I go in and I'm going to save my file. Done. Well, when I go back over to my web page, it still says Hello World. It didn't change, and I'm kind of upset about that. So now I remember it's often necessary to refresh your page. There are a number of ways you can do that. You can typically go to the little circular area up here and click Refresh. You can right-click and click on Reload, or you can also go to View. You can also do it through the toolbar on top. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh right here, and you can see now I have the Hello Everybody. The other problem I mentioned is that sometimes people change their file name. So maybe you're not working on your first page anymore, so you decide, I'm going to save this as File, Save As, Second Page. save it. I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to refresh the file. Hello, everybody. Well, nothing happened. You are going to find this happening over and over and over again. When you're dealing with a lot of files all at the same time, you have to make sure that the one you're looking at on the browser matches the one that you've been typing. Because I changed the name of my file, I need to remember to change it up here in the URL bar as well. Boom. Another issue that comes up quite frequently is this idea that you get, we'll call it, weird characters. One of the #1 reasons for this happening is my old favorite, copy and paste. Whenever I give you code and you're looking at it through PowerPoint, the problem is when you copy and paste it, a lot of the characters don't translate exactly the way you hope them to, and you get what we call weird characters. The #1 culprit is the quotes. So whenever you're typing and you have some sort of weird thing you're not expecting, go back in and try typing the code in by hand. So I've shown you how to create and edit a file in Sublime, but I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to see how I can create files using the editors that they have on their own computer. So I'm also going to show you an example in TextEdit and also in Notepad. I really hope when you watch these examples, you'll have your computer out and you'll type along with me. Go ahead and pause, stop things. Don't go ahead in the video until you feel confident that you're at the point that I've reached myself. Hi everyone, now we're going to go ahead and make a file with TextEdit. And if I wanted to be evil, I would go through and show you a very quick, simple example of making a file in TextEdit. But instead, I'm going to be very honest with you and admit that it just took me about 15 or 20 minutes to figure out how to make a really simple file in TextEdit. So first, let me show you what I did wrong. All right? I'm going to go ahead and paste in my code from my very simple page. In fact, let's get rid of this. There we go. We've just got our header and our content. So you can type this in as we go along, or you can wait. So it's time for me to save the file. And what I need to do is I need to make sure I'm saving it in the proper folder with a file name. So I'm going to go ahead and call this first page. And I'm going to go down here and I want to make sure that I save this as a web page. So one of the options is .html. So I'm going to click on this. I now have my first page.html. It's in the folder that I want, and I really feel like we should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now, I'm going to go over here to my web pages folder, open it up, and it's going to open up in Chrome. So let's see how it goes. That is not what I was hoping for when we were first taping this segment. And it took me a really long time to figure out what was going on. The first thing I went to check, let me close this up, is I wanted to make sure that my file extension really had been .html. And it was. There wasn't a .text or a .rtf after it. The next thing I went in and checked is that all of my quotes were going the right way. So let's go ahead and put these in. Because if you remember, I'm always telling you that copy and paste can sometimes give you bad quotes. So we can go back again. Still no luck. If you're going to be using TextEdit, you actually need to go in and make some changes to the TextEdit program. It has nothing to do with what you're typing. It has to do with the TextEdit program. So I'm going to go ahead, copy this just in case I lose it, and clear it out. And I'm going to go up to TextEdit, select Preferences, and you can see that we have two options, New Documents and Open and Save. So one of the first things I'm going to say is, hey, whenever I have a new document, I would like it to be in plain text. Not RTF or rich text, but plain text. The second thing that you want to do is go over here to Opening. See the display HTML files as HTML code? We're going to go ahead and click on that. And then lastly, the most important thing is when you save your files, we want to save it as UTF-8. So I'm going to pause here for a second, just a second, while you look at your own TextEdit menu. You want to make sure that you have these boxes checked and you've changed it to Unicode UTF-8. Okay? If you've messed things up, go down to Restore All Defaults and try it again. I'm going to close this up. I'm going to go ahead and do new. Paste my code in. Ooh, that's very small for you, but that's okay. Do file, save, and let's call it first page 2.html. Up. You can see right away it says, do you want to use the HTML extension or the .text? And I'm going to tell it, use HTML. Before I click this though, I want to point out that down here, it's showing that it's going to save as Unicode UTF-8. I can get rid of this warning if I want to by unclicking this if no extension use TXT. So we're going to use HTML. Let's go over here. Let's cross our fingers. Let's hope for the best. And now I have a successful page. So if you're going to be using TextEdit, there's really not much you need to do except for the very first time you set it up. Make sure you go into the preferences. From there, I can now go in, make changes. We did it. Save and refresh. So hopefully now you can successfully save and edit a file. Okay, so let's say that you are using a PC to create your files. What you want to do is you probably want to use Notepad at first, since it's the free version of the editor that's already on your machine. The first thing I did was I made a folder right on the desktop where I can keep my files. I know it's small, you probably can't see it, but it's called Web Pages. If you don't know how to make a folder, just so you know, you can right-click on the desktop, go to New, and create a folder. Once you've created the folder where you want to save your files, I'm right off the bat going to go ahead and say File, Save, and I'm going to name this firstpage.html. It's very, very important that you include the .html. If you don't include that, the computer's going to think you're just working on any other old type of file. So I'm going to go down here and change it from text documents to all files. Go ahead and save. Oops, it already exists, but I'm going to say OK. So now it's time for me to put in some content. I'm going to cheat a little bit here and just copy and paste in my content, even though you're going to have to type it in bit by bit. So again, I have my doc type, my HTML language equals English, meta char set equals UTF-8, my title, and my content. Just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead in here and put my quotes back in, because quotes always make me nervous when I do copy and paste, that maybe I've put in some sort of character that my editor isn't going to recognize. Now that I'm pretty happy and sure that I've got the things that I want in my file, I'm going to go ahead and save it again, go into my folder, and click on First Page. And there we go. So now, every time that you're going to change your file, you can just keep both windows open if you have the room, make your changes. I have a file. Save and reload. Nice job. You've made a file using Notepad. So here I am at the Shay Howe textbook, and I'm on the section called Getting to Know HTML. If you're like me, when you're reading things about programming, you read them and you nod along, even when you don't always completely understand what they were talking about, and you wish there was some sort of example or, like a teacher showing you in real time what's going on. Well, Shay Howe uses CodePen, and that's one of the reasons I really like this textbook. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about. As you scroll down, you'll definitely see that there's places where there's code while you're reading. Oh, for instance, right here. You can see that they're talking about divisions, and they've given a little text, and it's HTML, and you understand the code, but you don't really know what it looks like. Well, if we scroll down a little bit further, you'll come across code that's actually inside something called CodePen. What you want to look for is this caption right here. It actually says Edit on CodePen on it. So let's see what happens when I click on this link. What CodePen does is it gives you a chance to see the HTML and also perhaps the CSS and JavaScript. I know that you don't necessarily understand CSS or JavaScript yet. You may not, but you can still always play with all the different parts. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. And you can see that they've put in the code for heading level 1, level 2, level 6. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to change it. And I'm going to say, what happens if I change this H3 to an H1? Go over here. You can see that the heading level 3, even though it says heading level 3, is much bigger. I love CodePen, and I really encourage you to always click on it and go in and see what happens when you type things in. You don't need an account, although you can definitely have one. It's a great way to feel like you really understand and own the content. Okay, let's talk about writing clean code. And when I'm talking about clean code, I'm talking about learning how to write code that's going to work on as many devices as possible. And in order to do that, you need to know a little bit about the Document Object Model, also called the DOM. When HTML5 was developed, the main kind of driving goal is that they wanted to stick by this standard, that any new features should be based on HTML, CSS, the DOM, and JavaScript. And you can have a chance to learn about each one of those. But I want to talk about the DOM for just a little bit because it's going to help you understand the HTML a little bit better. One of the things about geeky computer scientists like myself is that we love trees. Not like trees outside that are green and beautiful in the fall. We like mathematical trees. These tree-like structures that we can prove to be valid or invalid. Okay? So when we talk about HTML as a tree, we're talking about this idea that at the very root of the tree, we are going to be creating HTML. All right? And then, up here, and then from that tree, when we say, I'm going to make an HTML document, we want two parts. We want the head over here, and we want the body. In the head, we're going to keep all that kind of information that the user isn't going to see for the most part. The one difference is we might talk about the title, but we're going to have all that kind of hidden stuff nobody really cares about. In the body is where we're going to learn to put all of our HTML5 tags. So let's talk about HTML as a tree. All right? In this case, I'm showing you this idea that at the root of every HTML page should be what's called the HTML tag. That kind of thing that says, lets the browser know, I'm going to be giving you certain types of tags, and here's how I want them to work. If we don't look at it as a picture, I can also kind of just tell you that every tree has three parts to a well-formed document. The doc type, which is the version of HTML that you're going to be using. The head, which is all of the metadata, or kind of extra information. And the body. The body is the displayable content, the thing that most people are going to get back when they do the request response cycle. So let's talk doc type. You are so lucky. When I was creating web pages at first, and we were in HTML4, we had to come up with all these different ways to kind of explain whether our HTML4 was like very strict standards or whether it was transitional. In HTML5, it's very simple to say, nope, there's only one thing, and it's called doc type HTML, and you're all set. For the head, which is inside the head tag, we're going to have all this additional information used by the browser. So for instance, you might want to say what language you're creating your page in. You could also include, and you really want to include, what the title of your page is. And when I'm talking about the title, I'm not talking about big kind of header that you see. I'm talking about the little tiny thing you see in the tab of your browser. Later, you might want to add supporting files as well. You might want to have CSS files that will style your page, or JavaScript that can add on different interaction, or really any type of add-ons that's going to change the way people view and interact with your site. Other than the title, the metadata is not displayed. People will not see it. What people do see is the information that's in your body tag. That body tag is the bulk of your page. So it's very important to write well-formatted or tree-like code where you're making sure that every tag has an end, that you're not putting tags in weird orders. So most of the content in the body is displayed by the browser, but every once in a while there's a little bit of metadata in there too. But we're not going to hit that in this class. So let's look at an example. Right here, I have a file called template.html, and I'm displaying the code here on the screen for you. Can you find the three parts of a well-formed document? The first thing you want to look for is the doc type. We've got that right here, letting them know that this is an HTML5 document. We then have that HTML tag, which was the root of our really scientific tree, and I'm letting people know I'd like the language that it's displayed in to be English. In the head section, we've got that metadata, where it's telling us things like, hey, I know that there's lots of different keyboards and ways across the world to represent letters. I want you to use what's called UTF-8. Don't worry, just use it every time. And then the next part of my metadata is the title, where we want to see it saying my first page. That's it. That's two of the three parts. The last part is the body tag, and it's displaying, the content that we want to see on the screen. So let's look at this in a browser. What do I have? I have my title way up here and my displayable content right down there. Okay, I've written the code. The next step you should always do is validate the code. Say, okay, I've written code, it looks good, but I know that browsers, are very nice and they make things display nicely even when I haven't written good code. So if you go to validator.w3.org, you can check any website to see if the code is valid. And you have three choices. You can upload the URL, you can upload a file, or you can actually copy and paste your code and put it right in there. In this case, I've put in the URL to template.html. Run check, and yay! Not surprisingly, because I knew I was going to be taping this, it successfully checked. Don't worry about warnings. Warnings are usually in to kind of cover themselves. What if you want to validate your file, but your files aren't actually on the internet yet? Let's walk through really quickly an example of how you can do that. Let's say that I have my file template.html and I want to check it. And I want to point out to you that I went in and I changed the file and I put in an intentional typo. I spelled the closing tag for title incorrectly. So let's see what happens and if the browser or the validator can find this. What I'm going to do is I went to validator.w3.org and I'm now going to select the third option, validate by direct input. I go back to my file, Command A or Control A if you're on a PC, Command C. I copied all the code and now I want to put it in the validator. Hit check, up, and if we scroll down here, I can make this a lot bigger for you. You can see that I did get 2 errors. Uh-oh, why did I get 2 errors when I only typed 1 error in? Well, validators are never perfect, all right? So what error it found is it said, uh-oh, I found the end of a file and I was not expecting that. Well, the reason that happened is let's check out error number 2. It tells us, oh, you forgot to close the title tag. So sometimes one error can cause a lot of error messages. So don't worry. I've seen as many as 50 or 60 errors that once they corrected one line of code, it fixed more than 80% of those errors. So I'm going to go back over to my code. I'm going to fix it and put that title in, save it, copy it again, put it in, and I'm going to check again. And this time, checking complete, no errors. So just to review, You really want to follow DOM structure if you want a well-formed page. And following that structure means you always use beginning and end tags. Also, you close inner tags before outer ones. And what that means is if you start a title tag, you've got to end it before you end the body tag. All right? You also will want to use valid attributes, which is one of the things we're going to talk about a little later when we talk about images and basically parts of your page that need extra information. The problem with browsers is that they'll actually fix bad code for you. I always call them the helicopter parents of coding. It's like, oh, I know what you wanted it to look like, so that's the way I'm going to make it look on the screen. The problem is that doesn't always work for everyone. So just because your site looks good to you when you're looking at it on your browser doesn't mean it's right. You have to use a validator to check your code. This is it. Today is the day. I'm finally going to teach you enough HTML that you can start making an interesting page to share with your friends and family. It's also, unfortunately, probably, or at least hopefully, my first really big disappointment to you. And the reason is, I need to just break it to you right away that I can't teach you all of the HTML5 tags. I can't teach them all to you, and you don't want me to teach you all of the tags. It would be incredibly boring for me to list them all off to you. Instead, I'm going to get you started and point you in the direction of where you can find resources for more tags. Because it's really not until you need a tag that you ever really bother learning about it. Every tag has a beginning and an end. So right here, I'm using what's called an H1 tag or a heading tag to encase the words hello world. The first H1 is my start tag. It just shows the simple tag that I want inside brackets. The second tag, the closing tag, always starts with a slash. This indicates to the browser, oh, she's about to end a tag. This is one of the most common, is to have the start tag and the closing tag with some sort of text inside of it. My next tag, or the image tag, is what's called a self-closing tag. There's only one tag, and it contains both the beginning and the end. In this case, as soon as the browser sees the image tag, it knows that you're going to give it information that it can use to create a picture. And since there's no real text associated with the image, at least at this point, or any that you want to show on the screen, it's going to close itself. So while every tag has a beginning and the end, some do close differently. Also, some tags have what we call attributes. So the source, which is where the picture is located, and href, which is where the new page you want to go to is. So when we talk about the tags, for some of them, I'll also be talking about the attributes. Before we begin, I want to talk to you about one of the most important attributes of an element, and that's its display. The two most common display types are what are called block and inline. Block tags are ones that take up a certain amount of width and height. So anytime you have a tag that's called block, it's the same thing as if when you were typing, you hit new line at the end or enter or return. Inline tags are ones that only take up as much space as is needed. So I'm going to show you examples of both, but I really want you to understand some tags are block and some are inline. And it may not seem important now, but it's the kind of thing that's going to make it much easier for you when you're trying to make your pages look a certain way. So some of the most common tags include the ones I'm about to tell you about. Headings are block tags, and you have H1, H2, H3, all the way down to H6. These tags have what are called both syntax and semantics. To the browser, at first sight, it might simply mean, hey, everything that's in an H1 tag, I want to make it really big and bold. And things that are H6, I also want to make them slightly bigger and bolder, but not nearly as big as bold as the ones with the lower numbers. What a lot of people do is they just kind of randomly throw around H3 tags or H4 tags just because they like the look that the text takes on it. But these tags also have semantics, kind of a meaning that you don't see when you just look at it. And the semantics are things that are in an H1 tag have much higher importance than things that are in H5 or H6. And this is very important for people who are using screen readers. If you start throwing H3 tags and H2 tags all over the place just because you want them to be a little bit bigger and bolder, it's going to be very confusing. Another extremely common tag is the paragraph tag. It's also block, and inside of it, you can only contain other inline elements. So you can put a lot of text, a lot of pictures, and things like that. But you should never put a paragraph inside of a paragraph. Or even, you should never put a heading inside of a paragraph. Another common tag is the div tag. This is a generic section that tends to be larger than a paragraph, and it's related content that you would like to group together. Divs used to be the most popular tag. You would use a div for everything. The problem with divs is that there's really no semantic meaning behind a div. If you put a lot of them to your page, you're not giving your readers or users any extra information to let them know that this is a footer or a header or something along that line. Two additional tags that you'll find you use a lot are the list tags. If you put in the tag OL, that stands for an ordered list. By default, it's going to put each list item as 1, 2, 3, etc. You need to make sure that you end each of your list items before you start the next one. And you need to make sure that you've ended all your list items before you end your ordered list. The unordered list is very similar, only instead of using numbers, you'll use special symbols, perhaps the circle or the small square, depending upon your browser. Now, later when we talk about attributes, I'll mention that you can go ahead and change your ordered list so that instead of being regular numbers, you're using Roman numerals or uppercase letters or lowercase letters. But by default, these are just going to either be a 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., or some sort of little disk. Finally, one more tag that I know you're going to see a lot of is the line break tag. Line break is simply a BR, stands for line break, and this is a self-closing tag. Now, one of the things that's very important that I tell you is when you're typing your code, you can put as many line breaks in your code as you want. Enter, 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 enter. But the browser ignores all of it. The browser is not going to put something on a new line unless it runs out of space or it specifically sees the BR tag. So I mentioned before with the lists that tags can have attributes. Attributes provide additional information about an element. Sometimes they're absolutely necessary, sometimes they're just supplemental. The important thing to remember is that attributes are always specified in the start tag in the beginning. And attributes come in a name-value pair. So let's go ahead and look at a tag that needs attributes in order to work. I'm going to use the image tag as an example. Images are inline, which means you can actually put many images next to each other. And in order for an image tag to work, you pretty much need to tell the computer what picture it is you want it to show. So in this case, the source attribute indicates to the browser that the picture you want to show is called mypicture.jpg. Always notice that, again, it's a name-value pair. So the name of the attribute is source, and the value always goes in double quotes, and in this case is mypicture.jpg. Many people will just end right there, but I don't want you to do that. Images should also always include an alt attribute. Alt